Hey Splatter Squad, it's time to get out that vellum because I'm going to show you 3 creative ways on how you can get more use out of it. Let's get into it. Vellum is often overlooked in our mountain of supplies we have. The reason for this isn't really clear, but it could be because of its finicky nature, it tends to be challenging to adhere, or perhaps the techniques we've used it for in the past are kind of forgettable. Now, there are no boring techniques in this video today. In fact, my most favorite technique I'm going to be showing you, I personally haven't seen anyone do it. Now, that isn't to say no one hasn't done it. It just means I haven't seen it, and maybe you haven't seen it either. So I'm super excited to share it with you. Now, before we get into the 3 techniques that actually work, I want you to know that not everything goes as easy as my videos may seem at times. And I too have failed, sometimes a lot. Like I did with this embossing folder vellum technique. No matter what vellum I used, what brand embossing folder I tried, it just wasn't working. My vellum always cracked, and I probably tested out 10 different sandwiches on how to run it through the die cut machine. So if you have any tips on using embossing folders and vellum, please leave it in the comments for me down below. All right, let's get into that first technique. For this technique, you're going to need vellum, an embossing dauber, anti-static tool, embossing glaze, a stencil, and a heat tool. To avoid getting embossing glaze all over the vellum where we don't want, you need to make sure that you use an anti-static tool. Take your choice of stencil and place it on the vellum. You're going to apply the embossing dauber through the stencil. You're going to pick out a few different colors of embossing glaze. I'm using fossilized amber, uncharted mariner, and hickory smoke. I am sprinkling the embossing glaze onto the vellum because I'm trying to get a blended look within the colors. So when I add my second color, I will add a little bit where I put the first color. Very similar to how we ink blend. I'm going to do the same thing with the third color, and I added a lot more of the hickory smoke than I had wanted to, and not as much uncharted mariner, but I love the end result and that's all that matters. So I'm going to sprinkle off the excess, and you could see I'm just kind of blending the colors out, not really caring. I got a little bit of the gray into the yellow. I don't mind at all because there's no perfection here. If you've used vellum before, you know it can be finicky, especially when adding heat to it. So what you want to do is start melting the embossing glaze from the front and then move the heat tool to the back of the vellum and then back to the front of the vellum. This way you're melting the embossing glaze from both sides. Today, I'm not just showing you the techniques, I'm going to be creating a card using each vellum technique so you have ideas on how to actually use them. These cards are pretty simple, but either way, I didn't want you leaving this video with just more ideas and backgrounds that don't get used. The real secret to adhering vellum is double-sided adhesive. So I have this big roll from scrapbook.com and I just ripped off a piece and then just laid it right on top, or on the back of the vellum, I should say. And then I started ripping the vellum and realized that it was a little bit easier just to kind of cut it out, the panel that I wanted for my card. So instead of adhering the vellum piece directly to the card base, which would make it really flat, I'm going to adhere it to a piece of white cardstock. This way I can add foam adhesive to the back of the white cardstock, and then nothing is going to show through and no one will know the difference. I didn't think of this until afterwards, but you can do some stamping or some other techniques on top of the white cardstock. And then because the vellum and the embossing glaze are both transparent, you will get a totally different look. So at this point, I realized that I didn't want to adhere the vellum straight to the card base, even though it was popped up. I wanted some sort of texture in the background. So I took a Spellbinders embossing folder, ran some cardstock through, and then I layered that on top of my card base. And then I put the vellum embossing glaze panel on top of that. And then I'm just going to adhere a simple die cut leaf and then a sentiment, and this card is complete. As always, I encourage you to use what you have in your stash, but if you're looking for any of the supplies that I'm using today, the full supply list will be in the description box. For this second technique, you're going to need a piece of vellum 2 times larger than what you actually need, blending solution, alcohol pearls, and a small hairdryer. The trick to using alcohol inks on vellum is having a larger piece than what you actually need. This way, you can add the alcohol ink to the center, and that way it doesn't curl up as much. When using alcohol pearls, it's very important to use blending solution. These will not work with isopropyl alcohol. So you're going to add the blending solution to the center of the vellum, then add your choice of alcohol pearl colors. You're going to move around the color with your hairdryer. I like to add splatters with with isopropyl alcohol or blending solution. I even like to add some gold splatters. This takes the background to a whole new level. Now that the background is done, it's time to make a card. For this one, I pulled out my scrapbook.com double-sided adhesive sheets. These are amazing to have on hand. I cut down my vellum piece to card size. I believe it's 4 by 5 1/4. I'm going to place the double-sided adhesive on the back of the vellum and take off that protective sheet and then add it directly to my card base. I took a die cut from my bin that I have next to my work surface, and I do a craft room reset every month where I just die cut out a bunch of my favorites so that I have them on hand. This is easy, just to grab one and create a quick card. I'm going to add some Artis glue to the back of the die cut and add a quick sentiment, and there is the finished card. All right, the time has come. It's time for my favorite technique using vellum. You're going to need some vellum, of course, distress oxide inks, a gel plate, a 6-inch brayer, a stencil, some bubble wrap, or something else to make some texture with. All right, the colors I am using today are going to be picked raspberry, fossilized amber, twisted citron, and then down at the bottom, peacock feathers. I'm tilting my ink pad while I'm applying it to the gel plate so that I try and eliminate ink transfer to my ink pad from the previous color. Once I have all of my colors down, I'm going to use my 6-inch brayer, and having a 6-inch brayer really helps get the ink smooth. I'm going to brayer that out, and then I'm going to take a stencil and then lightly over top of that, I'm going to press it in with a piece of cardstock. That's just going to give a nice impression of that stencil. I'm not trying to lift up any of that ink. Then I'm going to place the vellum on top of the gel plate. I'm going to smooth out the vellum with my hand. Then I'm going to lift up that vellum, and then you could see a nice print. We're going to take the ink that's left on the brayer and brayer it back out onto the gel plate. Take the same piece of vellum and lay it back onto the gel plate the exact way you did before. Smooth it out with your hand. This is going to add more ink to the background so we can have a more vibrant print. Now the oxide ink is dry at this point, but I wanted to be double sure so that it wasn't going to transfer all over the place. So I used my heat tool to make sure that it was dry. All right, and if you've been following along, you know it's time to make a card. So I'm taking that double-sided adhesive roll from scrapbook.com. I just place it on the back of the vellum piece. I'm going to fold my card base, and I like to do top folding cards measuring at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I did cut my vellum off camera, and a little tip to adhering the vellum with a large piece of double-sided adhesive is just to bend that corner just a little bit so you can line it up, and then once you have it lined up, you're going to press that corner down, and then you can pull it up, pull the piece of vellum up, and then kind of rip away and smooth out that piece of vellum onto your card base. I'm going to just pull the backing just a little bit and then start using this scraper tool and just moving it down the vellum. This is the easiest way that I found to do it. Here's a package of die cuts that I restock during my monthly craft room reset. And again, these are going to be my most used die cuts. I'm going to adhere this die cut with some glue dots. And this die cut, I believe, is from Pink Fresh Studio. And again, all of the links will be down below. And of course, where's my splatter squad at? No card is complete without splatters. I'm going to be using the Dina Wakley Gloss Spray in white. I'm going to pop up my sentiment with some foam adhesive, and there's the final card. Now I know I went over the alcohol ink on vellum pretty quickly, so I'm going to link the full video right here. You do not want to miss how amazing these backgrounds turn out. I'll see you there.